Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for gathering together to immerse ourselves in one another's lives and one another's interpretations and in the text itself, all of which is a part of the great text of life and learning and wisdom. This week we are in Parshat Toldot, which begins in chapter 25 of the book of Genesis, verse 19. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this opportunity of coming together and immersing ourselves in Torah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher tishanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We begin in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, with verse 19. We'll read through our English translation of our weekly Torah portion. I'll share with you a little bit of focused study, and then we'll open it up for our conversation together. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and Adonai responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of Adonai, and Adonai answered her, "Two nations are in your womb, two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Dave, would you like to read starting at verse 24?
Well, when her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red, like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished," which is why he was named Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I am at the point of death, so of what use is my birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn his birthright.
Thank you so much, Dave. Margot, would you like to read at the beginning of chapter 26?
There was famine in the land. Aside from the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Ger. The Lord had appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt and stay in the land, and do not go down to Egypt and stay in the land which I point out to you. Reside in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I will assign all these lands to you and to your heirs, fulfilling the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your heirs as numerous as the stars in the heaven, and assign unto your heirs all these lands, so that the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your heirs. Inasmuch as Abraham obeyed me and kept my commandments, my laws, and my teachings."
Thank you so much. June, would you like to read a little beginning at verse 6?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, She is my sister. For he feared to say, My wife, lest the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she is fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, Behold, of a surety she is thy wife. And how saidst thou, She is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, Because I said, Lest I die because of her. And Abimelech said, What is this thou hast done unto us? One of the people might easily have lain with thy wife, and thou wouldest have brought guiltiness upon us. And Abimelech charged all the people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death.
Thank you so much, June. Robin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 12?
Yes, thank you. In that area, Isaac sowed seed. Wait, am I in the right place? And in that year, he received 100-fold, for Adonai blessed him. The man grew rich, and he went on growing all the richer until he was exceedingly rich. He had herds of sheep and herds of cattle, and a large body of servants, so that the Philistines envied him. And the Philistines stopped up all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, filling them with rubble. Abimelech now said to Isaac, Leave us, you have become much too numerous for us. So Isaac went away from there, encamping in the Wadi of Gerar. There he settled. Isaac then turned to digging anew the water wells they had dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham's death, and he gave them the same names as his father had given them. And when Isaac's servants dug in the wadi, they discovered there a well of living waters, and the shepherds of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's shepherds, saying, The water is ours. So he named the well Wrangle, for they had wrangled with him. They then dug another well, but they quarreled over this one too. So he named it Animosity. He then moved from there and dug another well, and over this one they did not quarrel. So he named it Rehoboth, meaning, Now Adonai has granted us ample room and will make us fruitful in the land.
Thank you
And
so much, Robin.
Yeah.
Let me invite Jim, would you like to read a little beginning at verse 23?
Thank you, Rabbi. From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Adonai appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you and increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there and invoked Adonai by name. Isaac pitched his tent there, and his servants started digging a well. And Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his counselor, and Phicol, chief of his troops. Isaac said to them, Why have you come to me, seeing that you have been hostile to me and have driven me away from you? And they said, We now see plainly that Adonai has been with you, and we thought, Let there be a sworn treaty between our two parties. Between you and us, let us make a pact with you that you will not do us harm, just as we have not molested you, but have always dealt kindly with you and sent you away in peace. From now on, be you blessed of Adonai. Then he made for them a feast, and they ate and drank.
Thank you, Jim. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to read starting at verse 31?
Thank you, Rabbi. Early in the morning, they exchanged oaths. Isaac then bade them farewell, and they departed from him to peace. That same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. and said to him, "We have found water." He named it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba. To this day, sorry, I skipped a page. No, I guess not. When Esau was, is this right? When Esau was 40 years old,
Yeah.
he took to wife Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basmath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah.
So let me invite Steve. Would you like to read at the start of chapter 27?
Oh, sure.
Yes, thank you. Oh, which Steve?
Oh,
Yes, Steve Breton. Yes, thank you.
When Isaac had grown old and his eyesight had dimmed, he called his elder son Esau, saying to him, "My son, here I am," he answered. "Look now," said he, "I have grown old, and for all I know, I may die any day. So pick up your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the countryside and hunt me some game. Then you can make me tasty dishes such as I like and bring them to me, and I will eat so that I can give you my heartfelt blessing before I die." As Isaac was speaking to his son Esau, Rebekah was listening. And when Esau went to the countryside to hunt for some game to bring him, Rebekah said this to her son Jacob, "Look, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me game and make me tasty dishes that I may eat, and then bless you before the Eternal before my death.' Now, son, listen to me. So what I am instructing you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 tender kids, and I will make them into tasty dishes for your father, such as he likes. You will bring them to your father, and he will eat, so that he may bless you before his death." But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Should my father feel me, I will seem to him like a cheat, and I will bring a curse on myself, not a blessing." His mother then said to him, "Any curse that you get will be on me, son. Just listen to me and go get them for me."
Thank you so much. Let me invite Susan and David. Would you like to read starting at verse 14?
I guess we're unmuted. Yes, thank you. And he went and he fetched and he brought to his mother, and his mother made a dish of the kind his father loved. And Rebekah took the garments of Esau, her older son, the finery that was with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the kids she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she placed the dish and the bread she had made in the hand of Jacob, her son. And he came to his father and said, "Father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have spoken to me. Rise, pray, sit up and eat of my game so that you may solemnly bless me." And Isaac said to his son, "How is it you found it this soon, my son?" And he said, "Because the Lord your God gave me good luck."
And Isaac said to Jacob, "Come over and I'll feel you, my son. Is this you, my son Esau, or not?" And Jacob came over to Isaac, his father, and he felt him. And he said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like the hands of Esau, his brother. And he blessed him. And he said, "Is this you, my son Esau?" And he said, "I am." And he said, "Bring it over to me and let me eat some of my son's game so that my soul will bless you." And he brought it over to him and he ate. And he brought him wine and he drank. And Isaac, his father, said to him, "Come over and kiss me, my son." And he came over and kissed him, and he smelled the aroma of his clothes, and he blessed him and said, See, my son's aroma is like the aroma of a field that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has blessed. And may God give you from the dew of the skies and from the fat of the earth and much grain and wine. May people serve you and nations bow to you. Be your brother's superior, and may your mother's sons bow to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed.
Thank you so much, both of you. And let me invite Justin. Would you like to read starting at verse 30?
Thank you, Rabbi. And it came to pass, when Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and it came to pass, Jacob had just left his father, Isaac's presence, that his brother Esau came from his hunt. And he who too had made tasty foods, and he brought them to his father. And he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of the game of his son, so that your soul will bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? And he said, I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau. And Isaac shuddered a great shudder, and he said, who then is the one who hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate everything while you had not yet come, and I blessed him. He too shall be blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out a great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, bless me too, O my father. And he said, your brother came with cunning and took your blessing. And he said, it's not for this reason. Is it for this reason that he was named Jacob? For he deceived me twice. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I made him a master over you, and I gave him all his brothers as servants, and I have sustained him with corn and wine. So for you then, what shall I do, my son? And Esau said to his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me too, father. And Esau raised his voice and wept. And his father Isaac answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling place shall be the fat places of the earth, and of the dew of the heaven from above. And you shall live by your sword, and you shall serve your brother, and it will be when you grieve that you will break his yoke off your neck.
Thank you, Justin. Gary, would you like to read a little beginning at verse 41?
Thank you. Esau now bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had conferred upon him, and Esau formed this resolve. The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob. When Rebekah was told her elder son Esau's words, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, look, your brother Esau is plotting to avenge himself by killing you. Now, son, listen to me. Get going and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. You can stay there for a while until your brother's rage cools down. When your brother's anger turns away from you and he forgets what you did to him, I will send to bring you back from there. Why should I be bereft of the two of you in a single day? So Rebekah said to Isaac, I abhor my life because of the daughters of the Hittites. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of the Hittites, like these from among the daughters of the land, what would my life be worth?
Thank you.
Isaac then,
Let me invite Paul. Thank you, Gary. Let me invite Paul to read at the very start of chapter 28.
Thank you, Rabbi. So Isaac summoned Jacob and blessed him. He instructed him and said to him, do not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padanaram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take a wife from there from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And may El Shaddai bless you. May you make you fruitful and make you numerous, and may you be a congregation of peoples. May he grant you a blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may possess the land of your sojourns with God, which God gave to Abraham. So Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went toward Padanaram to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Aramean, brother of Rebekah, mother of Jacob and Esau.
Thank you so much, Paul. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read a little beginning at verse 6?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. When Esau saw that Yitzhak had blessed Yitzhak and sent him off to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, charging him as he blessed him, "You shall not take a wife from among the Canaanite women," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and gone to Padan Aram, Esau realized that the Canaanite woman displeased his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took to wife, in addition to the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, sister of Nebaoi.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. That's our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our general conversation. I've entitled this week's study session, "To Live Within a Riddle." I'd like to begin, if you have the study sheet, by looking at number 1, which is towards the beginning of our Torah portion. That's chapter 25, verse 22. And this is what Rebecca says as she discovers that she's pregnant, and she discovers that she has twins, and she's sensing that there is a turmoil going on within her, some kind of conflict within her being caused by these two twins. And she says, "Lama ze anochi," which is translated, at least in my version, as "if so, why do I exist?" So there's another way to render this as a question, which is Lama ze anochi, why is there an I? So if one views it as that kind of a question, she's asking this very profound and basic existential question. What's my purpose in life? Why do I live? What's the meaning of my existence? And if one views it as a question, it is very interesting to compare that with the kind of questions that at least Midrash attributes to Abraham. You remember in the Torah portion, Lech Lecha, it opens up by saying basically that God spoke to Abraham and said, "Leave the land of your father, leave the place where you were born, and go to a land that I will show you." And commentary is provoked by that way of opening up an exploration of Abraham's life by asking, well, why did God choose Abraham? And so Midrash begins to fill in this question that we have about the character of Abraham, and comes up with this notion that Abraham looked around him and wondered why the world was in the state it was. It seemed to be full of trouble, seemed to be full of danger, it seemed to be on the verge of destruction. And so because of that kind of questioning about the external world, God enters Abraham's life and says, "You have a mission to go on." So while that Midrash portrays Abraham as asking a question about the external world around him, which brings him into contact and relationship with God, the kind of question that Rebecca here is asking is a question about her internal world, about the nature of her being itself. And yet that kind of questioning has the same consequence. It propels her to seek out God. It propels her into a deeper relationship with God. There's another way to understand those three words, Lama ze anochi. As you know, in the Torah, the words are written without any punctuation, without capitalization. And so instead of reading it as a question, one could read it as a declarative statement. One could read it as Lama ze ani, which could be translated as whyness is who I am. So in that sense, she becomes aware that what it means to be alive is to be full of questions and wonder, that's the very purpose of existence, is to continually ask these kind of questions. And to ask those kind of questions is what propels human beings forward out of their current state into new possibilities. I'd like to explore a little bit more this notion about what it means to be struggling with questions, what it means to be trying to seek answers to questions, and what it means to alternatively just be accepting that questions is part of the propulsive energy of what it means to be a human being. So in number 2, I have a quote from Tegan Den Leighton, who is a Soto Zen priest. And he writes this: "We do not need an answer to our question. To be present in the middle of the question is itself complete." So here is this Zen Buddhist priest who acknowledges that so many of us are perturbed by things, and we want to understand why, and we struggle to gain answers. And Tegan Den Leighton says, it's enough just to accept that questions exist and to live within them. And if you live within them, then peace and awareness and wisdom will come. It's similar to what the great poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote in his piece, Letters to a Young Poet. And he wrote that, which is in number 3. "Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." We're going to explore a little bit more this notion about living the questions and living the questions rather than fighting against them or hiding from them or resisting them, eventually allows us to, opens up a pathway of understanding and peace. If you look at number 4, there's an interesting play that one can do with Rebecca's name. So there we have her name written in Hebrew, Rivka, and those same 4 letters, in one way of viewing them, constitute an anagram. You can take the same 4 Hebrew letters, rearrange them, and come up with a very different word. You take the resh, the bet, the kaf, and the he, and you just rearrange them, and you come up with kaf, resh, beit, he, and we'll see what we get. We look a little bit deeper into the Hebrew. So first of all, Rivka's name comes from the word ravak, which is a stall. It's a place where calves are fed and fattened. So it is a place of eventual enrichment, fulfillment. And then if we take those same letters that constitute her name, and we come up with the kaf resh beit he formulation, we see that that root is karev, which is the verb to approach. And we know this from the word korban, which is the word that's used for a sacrifice because it means something that will bring us closer to God. And the Hebrew word kirba, which means an approach, and kerev, which means inward part or midst. So there's something about Rivka's name which both expresses a sense of enrichment, of being fattened up, of being sated, and also having something to do with an inwardness, a midstness. So here is this character who captures this sense that where one finds fulfillment, if you will, has something to do with one's inner life, which is what she seems to be exploring, or alternatively, what she seems to be declaring to be the case. You turn over in your study sheet, also from chapter 25, from verse 23, we have this proclamation from God to Rebecca when she questions about, I've got these two beings struggling within me. What does it all mean? And the Hebrew, in terms of God's response, is Varav Ya'avod Sa'ir, which in my translation says, the older shall serve the younger. Now, it is possible, because of the Hebrew, and to read it differently. It's possible to also read it as the younger will serve the elder. So this is what we call in Hebrew a chida, a riddle. It's a perplexing question, an enigma. And there are several of these that we'll see throughout Torah, where the language is ambiguous enough so that it can be rendered in several different ways. We'll see that, for example, when we come up with the beginning of the book of Exodus, where there's words about the Hebrew midwives. And it's not clear from the Hebrew whether it's meant to say Egyptian midwives who served Hebrews, or whether these are in fact midwives who were themselves Hebrews. So the fact that these are kind of opaque and deliberately ambiguous formulations, what happens when we read them is that we get enlisted in finding the meaning. The Torah doesn't answer some of these questions for us. We have to participate, and that's why Judaism is particularly an interpretive religion. Nothing is given with great clarity, where so much of it is ambiguous, which then enlists us in the journey of meaning itself. So let's look at some of these consequences of a chida, a riddle, a perplexing question, or an enigma. So in number 7, well, this is something that we'll read next week when Jacob goes to Laban's home and sees beautiful Rachel and wants to marry her. And Laban says, of course, you just need to work for me for 7 years. And Jacob works for Laban for 7 years, marries his daughter, except the daughter turns out not to be Rachel because Laban has switched the daughters right before the ceremony, and it turns out to be Leah, his older daughter. And so this is, Jacob says this, why did you deceive me? And the Hebrew there is rimitani, why did you deceive me? And that word for deceit is a word that we saw in this week's Torah portion, where Isaac says to Esau, after Isaac has given this blessing to Jacob, and Esau sees what has happened and says, well, what about me? And Isaac says to Esau, your brother came with deceit, mirma. It's the same word that then will get thrown into Jacob's face, if you will, by Laban. And this comes from the Hebrew verb ramah, to beguile, to deceive. So the results of Jacob's deceit back in the home is quite telling. There's a rift between the two brothers. Jacob leaves home and is separated from family, doesn't see his brother for 20 years. And then, of course, the result of Laban's deceit of switching Leah for Rachel is that there's a tension that develops between Rachel and Leah, a sense of competitiveness. There's conflict between Rachel and Leah's children. Jacob eventually is deceived by the sons of his wives when they bring him Joseph's cloak and say, oh, Joseph was devoured by a wild animal. It will result in Jacob being deprived of Joseph's company for 22 years until they're eventually reunited, just as Isaac was deprived of Jacob's company for that period of time. So these aspects of behavior, which the fact that Jacob behaved one way and then it gets turned back upon him, all these have profound consequences that pass down through generations. So I'd like to share with you number 8, a poem by Wallace Stevens, in which he deals with the notion of what it means to be perplexed, what it means to be faced with questions. And his poem, Questions Are Remarks, contains these. In the weed of summer comes this green sprout. Why? Peter the voyant says, Mother, what is that? The object that rises with so much rhetoric, but not for him. His question is complete because it contains his utmost statement. It is his own array, his own pageant and procession and display. Since this poem takes us back to number 1 on our study sheet, Lamazeh Anochi. And in Wallace Stevens' poem, he's presenting this character, Peter, as not really asking a question when he says, Mother, what is that? He is making a statement. He is, in a sense, declaring that there are times when what sounds to some of us like a question is really something that this individual is living with. And that living with that question becomes not a source of tension, it becomes a pathway of wisdom. So what we're presented with in this week's Torah portion and setting us up for chapters that will follow is that we encounter these moments of deceptions, of weaknesses, of mistakes, but we'll also see that there are these moments of learning and reversal and even public displays of new self-knowledge. We'll see that later in the book when we come across Judah as he learns from his encounter with Tamar. We'll see that when we encounter Joseph and his relationship with his brothers, and they will begin to look back upon their lives, and they will draw lessons from mistakes that they made. And even more than just learning from those mistakes, they will make, in a sense, public declarations of reversal of how they have been living. They will display some kind of deeper self-knowledge. So here is, I think, the lesson that this week's Torah portion is setting up for us, which is that our goal is not to hide from or resist the riddles in our lives, but to live within them. And if we live within them, we will live through them and come to a deeper understanding of ourselves and those around us, and we'll be able to be a blessing, which is what this Torah portion is all about. With that, I'd love to open it up and hear what thoughts and reflections you have about this week's Torah portion. Anna, would you like to share something? Yeah. Okay.
Isaac pleaded with God on behalf of his wife because she was childless, and God listened, and she had two. What popped out at me today is verse 22. The children pressed against each other inside her. Now, when you have one baby inside of you, I have never had twins. The sense is not so much that they're pressing against you. Two babies would be even more pressing against you. My question would probably be with twins, wouldn't be based on the fact that they're pressing against each other, but it would be the pressure that I was feeling. So the question is interesting from a lot of different angles. if this is so, why do I exist? Seems to me to be the question of all the players in this story and the ones that will come, as you said. Why Jacob is going, if I have to deceive my father for the blessing, if I have to put on God, if this is the way it is, why do I exist? What a horrible thing to have to do, to deceive your father for a blessing. And poor brother who comes back, Esau, who comes back, and why, why did this happen? And everyone is saying, if this is really how it is, why do I exist? I like how you wrapped it up.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, it's fascinating to have, it's a female character who brings in this dimension of subjectivity of one's inner life and relationship to the world around one. So, if you raise your hand, oh, I see Jay. Go ahead, Jay. Unmute and share with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have just maybe three short questions. One is, I thought that Ramah meant the heights, like Ram Emanuel and Camp Ramah. Also, what about the painting by George W. Bush? Okay. And the third thing is, you mentioned that Judaism is an interpretive endeavor, or Judaism is an interpretive. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
So what did you say about Judaism?
An interpretive religion. Yeah.
Those are the three questions.
Okay. I'm glad you asked the question about the painting. I was waiting to see if someone would ask about that. So when I looked at it, I thought, oh, is this a painting that evokes a sense of questioning, of enigma? But that's not why I put it there. Let me tell you first a little bit. So George W. Bush, a former president of the United States, engaged after his presidency in a series of paintings that he did about people that he called heroes, people who served in the military post 9/11. And this particular portrait is of Sergeant Daniel Cassera. Now, Sergeant Cassera served in the United States Army for about 15 years, and he was deployed to Iraq in 2005. And when he was deployed in southern Baghdad in 2005, his vehicle, an M113, rolled over an anti-tank mine, and the explosion flipped over his tank, killing 2 individuals and injuring 4. And Cassera himself suffered injuries to both legs and to the heels and ankles bones on both feet. And he had at least 24 surgeries that I'm aware of. And then recently in 2018, he registered at San Diego State University, where he's majoring in urban studies.
Wow.
So the reason I picked this painting is because I don't know deep within his heart what George W. Bush really thinks about the decision that he made to invade Iraq. What I do know is this, is that after he left the presidency, he did these several dozens of works of art of people who served in the military that he was responsible in part for deploying. And to me, I can't look inside of his heart, but I look at his canvases. And when I look at his canvases, what I see there is a depth of compassion, a depth of curiosity, a depth of caring, and perhaps a depth of his way of trying to understand himself and his relationship to all these men and women that he deployed and the consequences of what it meant. And to me, it is a profound display of some degree of public learning and self-reflection, although I don't think has the personality to publicly say a lot of these things, but they're in his canvases.
They sure are.
And I find that very compelling. And to me, that's an example of what Torah is trying to teach us, which is that we live forward, but we learn by looking backwards. And to me, his canvases display a deep and profound sense of learning. So that's why I shared this particular painting. Gary, and then Justin.
I wanted to make a quick comment that it was interesting that Jay referenced your comment about Judaism being an interpretive religion. I'm actually reading a book now by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. It's a letter in the scroll. And throughout that book, that's what he references, that Judaism, he uses those words. It's an interpretive religion. I just found that to be an interesting coincidence. But I wanted to comment and share on the Torah study sheet that you sent, where it says, we do not need an answer to our question. I was introduced to this concept not that long ago, and it was one of the most transformative concepts in my life. Because as one of the things I love about studying Torah is a lot of times we're dealing in nuance and just a little slice of life, but sometimes we deal with the big issues. What happens when we die? Why is there suffering? Why did it take 100 years for the Cubs to win the pennant? All these big issues. And I always felt that I had to have an answer, and it could become stressful because I couldn't figure it out. And this concept, it taught me that it's okay. It's all right. You don't have to have the answer. And when it's really useful is when I'm having an animated discussion with friends about faith. And that's what they'll come back to me. Oh, if you believe in a benevolent God, there's so much suffering. And when I let them know there's some things I don't know, it really diffuses the conversation. So anyway, it's a wonderful concept. And I'm so pleased that you let me know that it's also, you mentioned that this is from a Zen, did you say a Buddhist or
yes, Zen Buddhist.
A Zen Buddhist.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you. Let me call on Justin, then we'll get to Paul.
Rabbi, I really do sense in the George Bush painting a sense of the teshuvah that's really there, and that this is all this parsha is about so many sufferings that are here, that are being inflicted at this time, but the teshuvah that's coming seems to be, and I read it deeply in that Bush painting. I'm surprised by it, deeply surprised. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. David Phillips, yeah. Go ahead and unmute David.
Okay, it's Susan's computer. I do not know how to operate the mute on my computer, much less Susan's. I just wanted to say that I love you, Gary Roberts, among the heroes of the world. And I have found after decades that not only is it okay to be lost in the middle of the question, but it's better to be swimming in the middle of the question than to get to the end and to the answer.
Beautiful. That's really beautiful. So just to remind us that Elie Wiesel said, God is found in the middle of the question. And in Hebrew, the question is she'elot. And the word el is in the middle of that word. And that's what Elie Wiesel is picking up on, is that the word for God is in the middle of the word question. So, let me call on Paul and then Mark.
Yeah, I think I'd like to proceed by my question or comment with the point that I really, just because I come up with the obvious doesn't mean that don't tune in faithfully every week to enjoy what I'm learning from the other, deeper side. But I have to defend sometimes the obvious. Now, there's a big point about Rivka. Well, I want to defend Esav. From his, here you have a woman called Rivka, and she's living in a world where every third word there's communication with God. If anybody understands that God is up there watching, she understands that. And in fact, her youngest son understands it and kind of comes up with it in the dialogue. And so it turns out that everybody's aware of the guy upstairs watching what's going on, this cheating that's going on. And it doesn't seem to bother them. They just go ahead with it. And the bad guy of this whole thing is Esau. He's the only guy that's actually behaving, and he even comes up with some logic. God is infinite. You know what? He has more than one blessing. So the bad guy, Esau, seems to have a more of a higher opinion of the man above than these characters who are kind of conniving and making believe they're not being watched. And so I just want to say a few nice words for Esau.
I like that.
Very nice. And just a reminder that the greatest commentator of all times, Rashi, said, all I'm doing is looking at the straightforward and the simple. And of course, it was never straightforward and simple, but
My case is simple.
okay, thank you, Paul. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Yeah.
Tom is a compliment.
I want to talk about the question and wonder if there are different levels of the qualities of questions. For example, we learn now that Rebecca is inward driven. She's asking, who am I? But Isaac, on the other hand, he doesn't ask that kind of question. He's more outward driven. He's concerned about the identity of his sons. He's saying, who are you? But then he reacts on the basis of tactile physicality. So he says, you feel like Esau, but he acknowledges that it's Jacob's voice. So apparently that aspect of Jacob isn't as important to him as the physical nature. Nevertheless, he agrees to go ahead with the deceit. So I just think it's interesting to draw the distinction between Rebecca and Isaac, and how Isaac doesn't appear to me, at least, to be at all concerned about the inward questions. Neither is Jacob, and maybe Esau. I agree with Paul. Esau probably is a little more enlightened in that regard.
So it seems pretty clear from the text that Jacob and Rebecca are kind of aligned and have an affinity for one another. And it's also clear that Isaac and Esau have an affinity for one another. And it even seems as if Isaac really has a greater fondness for Esau and indulges in that same level kind of physicality of that he loves that Esau goes out and hunts and brings back this wonderful food and has that kind of outward orientation, whereas Jacob is the home boy who has more of an inward orientation. And yet Isaac seems as if he realizes, but the blessing from my father that's to be passed on really is not appropriate for Esau. He has a different kind of blessing that's due him, which has to do with physicality and the land and bounty and things like that. Whereas Jacob is really the one to carry forward the blessing of the covenant and of generations and of settling and those aspects of building nations, of what the covenant with Abraham was all about. So he perhaps engages in this kind of conflict. Those of us who have been fortunate enough to be parents, of course, we've never experienced conflicts, right? in terms of preferences that we have over children or trying to guide our children in one way or another. So, and when we act that way as parents, to be a parent is to make mistakes. That's just what being a parent is to make mistakes, and to be a human is to make mistakes. And so it is just very beautiful to realize as we look backward in life that we all make mistakes, and the grace and the wisdom is to be able to see what they may have been and try and repair them. And that's where I think Torah is taking us. It's taking us through a vista of human beings, all of whom make mistakes. But they make these mistakes with the best of intentions, because we all have limited knowledge. We all have limited insight and limited perspectives. And because of that, we're going to be making mistakes. And the Torah acknowledges that. No one in this book is perfect. Okay? But what it's also showing us is that the redemption is possible. And the great bit of drama that we'll see very soon is when Jacob engages in this wrestling match, which is this moment of kind of realizing the separation that he has been the consequence of his earlier behavior and his capacity to re-embrace and heal by giving back to Esau that which he took from him, his blessing. Okay. So let me invite someone who hasn't said anything yet. Okay, Margot.
Rabbi, on the lighter side, you say that parents make mistakes. So that's the joy of being a grandparent. You see the mistakes that you made, and you don't with your children, and you try very hard not to make them with your grandchildren.
Okay, thank you, Margot. Okay, and anyone else who hasn't said anything yet? And then Anna, go ahead.
Verse 12 in chapter 26 is a really important one to me. It's a very little line, and here it is. In that area, Isaac sowed seed, and in that year he received 100-fold. Well, when he sowed seed with Rebekah, he had twofold. But the fact that he sowed seed sets him apart from everyone else in the story. I just think that there's a whole lot of meat on that little bone.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Okay. Richard.
Yes. A couple of things really briefly, I'll try. Rebecca says, if there's a curse, it will fall on me. Well, since Jacob goes on to become Israel, does she get a blessing instead of a curse? And I think of these three sets of brothers, Cain and Abel, Ishmael, and Isaac, and Esau, and the boy Jacob. And all the little ones were the prize ones, and the older ones got pushed out. And the older ones were the ones who, that's the first son, they're supposed to get the best. Well, they did get the best. They got the world to go out in, and they got a blessing. And they are the ones that farm the world, that make the world happen. And the mother's child, who's in the kitchen and learns to cook and is sweet and snuggles with the sheep, and in one case got sacrificed. And Cain went out and he kept himself away from God because he didn't want to embarrass God. He had some spirituality in there. But my point is that there are those two forces that we have, not good and evil, but active in the world, extroversion, doing things and doing it right and feeding everybody, and then seeking the sacred. And we're always juggling that. That's the question everyone is dealing with every day. Which, do I just go out and, get food for everybody and make a lot of money and have inflation? Or do I go to temple and try and learn how to pray to bring, you do both, or don't decide, just see what the day brings. And I see that lastly, I want to say that I see that Sarah and Rebecca and ultimately Rachel as well, they're making the call about where the seed is sown and what the womb is that's going to carry Judaism forward. They're the ones that decide. And I think that's, and I noticed in today's portion, Ishmael and Esau goes off and marries the niece of Ishmael, those people. And we know that Esau and his brother, came together, and Ishmael also, that those families are united in a way. They're different parts of the world, but the story tells us if you just question it and don't make a decision, then you can balance loving both sides.
So that's, I think, a beautiful way to kind of draw this to a conclusion for this evening, which is this notion about, rather than, as Gary put it earlier, feeling the stress of having to have the answer, that sometimes you just have to live with the contention, the conflict within us, these competing voices, these competing points of view, which some people would say, well, one has to be obliterated so that the other can survive. And Judaism says the only way to really have the energy that propels us forward is to live with the complexity and the ambiguity and the tension. And that's where the energy is. The energy is not by obliterating one side so that you have this hegemony of a single point of view. So to live within the riddle, which is, I think, the lesson that emerges from this week's Torah portion, is just that. And I go back to what the poet Rainer Maria Rilke said. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without even noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. I'm so grateful that all of you come together and we share these questions, because when we come together to share the questions, it makes it so much easier for me to live within them. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless you all. Be well. Thank you.
Oh.
Good night.
Night.
Have a good week, everyone.
You